Recent diplomatic efforts have crystallized around a potentially transformative, yet inherently fragile framework designed to bring about a durable cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, though the path forward remains deeply fraught with structural risks and significant opposing viewpoints, particularly from Moscow.
The core of this nascent proposal emerged from intensive, high-stakes discussions held in Berlin across 2 days in mid-December, bringing together Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky with key American envoys, notably Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, son-in-law to former President Donald Trump. These direct engagements, reportedly totaling approximately 8 hours, signaled a serious commitment from Washington to define the contours of a negotiated end to the nearly 4-year conflict. Following the meetings, American sources indicated that the two sides had achieved a remarkable 90% convergence on a detailed plan, while President Zelensky, commenting on the progress, acknowledged genuine momentum. Crucially, the major breakthrough, as detailed by the Ukrainian side, centered on Washington's proposition to offer security guarantees, strikingly analogous to Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a development that followed President Zelensky's prior declaration of Ukraine's willingness to forego its long-standing aspiration for formal NATO membership. This specific assurance is paramount, given that NATO's Article 5 dictates that an armed attack against one member shall be considered an attack against all, thereby requiring a coordinated collective response from the entire alliance. The Ukrainian president's assessment, delivered on December 15th, suggested cautious optimism. It is important that the United States has accepted guarantees similar to Article 5 and other security proposals. We are achieving progress on this aspect. I find these proposals quite sound, even if they currently constitute only the initial draft. These security guarantees are not merely symbolic gestures. They are evidently constructed as the foundational buttress for a much broader peace accord aimed at achieving a lasting ceasefire. From the perspective of Western negotiators, these assurances are deemed essential preconditions necessary to persuade Kyiv to consider potential territorial concessions within any final peace agreement with Russia, and simultaneously to cement their renunciation of NATO ambitions. The complexity of these commitments is reflected in their division into 2 distinct documents that resulted from the Berlin negotiations, according to accounts from participating U.S. and European officials. The first document reportedly outlines the overarching general principles, focusing specifically on the establishment of the Article 5-like security guarantee framework. The second document, described by the American side as a military-to-military cooperation instrument, delves into the operational specifics, explaining the modalities by which U.S. and European military forces would coordinate with Ukraine's defense apparatus. The explicit objective of this highly detailed cooperation is to establish a credible deterrent, ensuring that Russia is unable to seek further territorial gains within Ukraine in the future. Sources familiar with the discussions indicate that this second military document contains highly granular directives, meticulously designed to reassure Ukraine across a spectrum of potential Russian attack scenarios.
One anonymous American official went so far as to describe the document as extremely detailed regarding the methods of both deterring and punishing Russia should Moscow elect to renew military aggression against Ukraine. The seriousness attached to the military dimensions of a potential ceasefire was underscored by the physical presence of General Alexis Grinkowicz, the commander of NATO operations and the U.S.-European Command within the negotiating delegation in Berlin.
This presence signals that the discussions moved far beyond mere political promises, integrating concrete military planning into the diplomatic framework. Furthermore, the gravity of the discussions aligns conceptually with prior statements, such as those made by former President Trump in August, indicating a readiness for the U.S. to utilize air power in support of European forces operating within Ukraine. Concurrent with the Berlin meetings, 12 European leaders issued a joint statement on December 15th, outlining the points of convergence reached between them and the U.S. delegation. These agreements committed the West to providing sustained and substantial support necessary for Ukraine to maintain a substantial peacetime military force, estimated at approximately 800,000 personnel. They further elaborated that a European-led multinational force would be established, drawing participation from willing nations, with France, the United Kingdom, and Poland being among the expected core contributors. However, a significant and potentially inflammatory detail remains ambiguous, whether this multinational force would be deployed physically inside Ukrainian territory. The proposed peace architecture is also contingent upon a U.S.-led mechanism for monitoring and verifying the ceasefire, designed to rapidly detect violations and provide early warning of potential future attacks. Crucially, this system also involves establishing protocols for de-escalation should breaches occur. The mechanism specifically relies on American reconnaissance and surveillance assets to provide early detection of any Russian maskirovka or deception operations aimed at massing forces to resume hostilities, echoing the large-scale military exercises Russia conducted close to the border immediately preceding its February 2022 invasion. The European leaders' statement emphasized that these commitments represent a legally binding pledge aimed at restoring peace and security in the event Ukraine is attacked, specifying measures ranging from the potential use of force and the sharing of critical intelligence and logistics to the deployment of coordinated economic and diplomatic actions. Despite this strong language, one pressing unanswered question looms: whether U.S. forces would actively intervene to protect European troops deployed to Ukraine if those troops came under attack. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz offered a positive assessment of the political and legal commitments offered by the U.S., concluding that Ukraine will be able to defend itself over the long term, not only through its own capabilities, but with the substantial backing of allied nations.
That is good news. Even President Trump noted having very long and good exchanges with his Ukrainian counterpart and various NATO and European leaders. In Washington, influential figures, including Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, have reportedly encouraged the White House to submit the proposed security guarantee package to the Senate for a formal vote.
Analysts suggest that congressional approval, if secured, would send a powerful and enduring message of U.S. support for Ukraine, irrespective of future changes in the White House administration. Trump and U.S. officials have expressed an ambitious hope of finalizing a peace agreement by the end of the year, a timeline that European and Ukrainian officials widely regard as overly optimistic, if not entirely unrealistic, given the profound obstacles remaining. Furthermore, U.S. officials have stated that Ukraine and Russia will need to engage in direct negotiations concerning the ultimate fate of the territory in eastern Ukraine, a complexity widely viewed by observers as the most intractable dimension of the conflict. The largest immediate impediment to the potential ceasefire agreement, however, is the fundamental fact that Russia was entirely excluded from the negotiations in Berlin. Analysts unanimously concur that any lasting agreement to end the fighting will necessitate significant, painful concessions from both President Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin. While Zelensky maintains a resolute stance that he will not relinquish territory, Putin has been equally adamant that there will be no deviation from his demands, which include Kiev's complete surrender of the entire Donbass region. The Russian perspective, reiterated forcefully by Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov on December 16th, clearly stated that Russia remains firm in its demand for Ukraine's total withdrawal from the Donbass, and explicitly rejected the acceptance of any NATO troop presence on Ukrainian soil. This staunch rejection poses an existential threat to the entire security guarantee proposal, potentially rendering the Article 5-style commitment stillborn. A senior European diplomat articulated the widespread skepticism regarding the probability of Russia accepting a peace agreement constructed unilaterally by the U.S. and Europe. As long as Russia perceives that they maintain military advantage, the opportunity for a truly sustainable peace remains genuinely fragile, the diplomat observed. When pressed on the feasibility of concluding negotiations before Christmas, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stated that attempting to predict a time frame for a peace deal was an unfeasible task. Although President Trump maintains that a peace deal is closer than ever before, European leaders remain deeply concerned that the entire diplomatic effort with the U.S. could collapse if the core, fundamental disagreements between Russia and Ukraine cannot be bridged. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk encapsulated the prevailing atmosphere of cautious anticipation, noting, "The willingness of the United States to provide security guarantees sounds extremely promising, especially compared to previous iterations of peace plans, but it would be an overstatement to say that we yet grasp all the specific details." The context thus reveals a monumental diplomatic achievement on paper,
balanced precariously against the enduring reality that the party whose compliance is essential for peace, Russia, views the entire framework as non-negotiable and fundamentally unacceptable, suggesting that while the context for peace has been established, the conditions for its execution remain highly uncertain. The framework devised in Berlin, though highly detailed and representing significant progress from Ukraine's perspective, ultimately exists in delicate tension with the entrenched geopolitical realities of the conflict, particularly Moscow's position. The fact that President Zelensky declared a 90% consensus had been reached with the U.S. envoys, including Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, underscores the gravity of the commitments being discussed, especially in light of Kyiv's willingness to officially set aside its NATO membership aspirations. It is highly probable that these discussions, spanning 8 hours over 2 days, centered on operationalizing the security assurances analogous to NATO's Article 5, creating a legal and military scaffolding intended to support a broader, albeit difficult, peace accord. The commitment to providing guarantees similar to Article 5, as outlined in the first of 2 critical documents, suggests a profound shift in U.S. policy, moving beyond simple military aid to a buy-in commitment to restore security should Ukraine face a future attack. The principles inherent in this document suggest Western powers would view an attack on Ukraine as an attack warranting a coordinated response, though it remains essential to note that the practical, legal mechanism of this assurance is unlikely to be identical to NATO's Collective Defense Clause, as that would necessitate Senate ratification and involvement in internal Ukrainian defense planning that the U.S. may wish to avoid. Instead, it is hypothesized that this commitment focuses on pre-agreed triggers for substantial, immediate support, rather than automatic U.S. troop deployment. The second document, described by U.S. officials as a military-to-military cooperation framework, delves into the granular instructions designed to establish robust deterrence. The seriousness of this technical planning was highlighted by the presence of General Alexis Grinkowicz, commander of U.S. European Command Operations, in the negotiation team. This suggests the proposed security architecture is not merely political window dressing, but contains concrete guidelines for how U.S. and European forces would coordinate with Ukraine to prevent future territorial encroachment. This document is reported to be highly detailed, outlining mechanisms for deterring and punishing Russia if hostilities resume. Specifically, a U.S.-led monitoring and verification system, leveraging advanced reconnaissance and surveillance assets, is proposed as an early warning mechanism. The clear objective here is to detect the kind of large-scale military buildup and deception operations, what might be termed the masking of intent, that preceded the 2022 invasion. The shared intelligence would be used to raise the alarm and potentially trigger pre-approved deterrent measures, establishing procedures for de-escalation should violations occur. Simultaneously, the European component of the security guarantee adds another layer of commitment, with 12 European leaders releasing a joint statement affirming sustained and substantial support for maintaining a large Ukrainian peacetime army, estimated at 800,000 personnel. Furthermore, the creation of a European-led multinational force, potentially involving France, the UK, and Poland, has been proposed. However, a significant element of ambiguity remains concerning the physical deployment of this force. It is currently unclear whether these troops would be stationed within Ukrainian territory, a move that would almost certainly represent an immediate and non-negotiable red line for Moscow. The European leaders described these commitments as legally binding, intended to restore peace and security, encompassing measures ranging from intelligence sharing and logistics to economic and diplomatic action, and potentially even the use of force. Yet the crucial question of whether U.S. forces would intervene kinetically to protect any European troops deployed to Ukraine should they come under Russian attack has not been fully clarified, suggesting a calculated ambiguity designed to satisfy Kyiv's need for security while avoiding an outright commitment to direct confrontation for Washington. While the political and legal commitments offered by the U.S. were praised by leaders like German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who viewed them as ensuring Ukraine's long-term ability to defend itself, the fundamental structural impediment remains the absence of Russian participation in the Berlin talks.
The current security guarantees are predicated on a future peace agreement that necessitates substantial territorial concessions from Ukraine, given Russia's insistence that Kiev must withdraw entirely from the Donbas region. This directly conflicts with President Zelensky's reiterated pledge that Ukraine will not surrender territory.
The analysis suggests that unless the core disagreement over the fate of eastern Ukraine is resolved, the security framework, robust though it may be on paper, cannot secure the necessary cessation of hostilities. Furthermore, the Russian Foreign Ministry, through Deputy Minister Sergei Rabkov, categorically stated that Moscow would not tolerate the presence of NATO military personnel on Ukrainian soil, implying that the very core element of the proposed security guarantee, the NATO-style Article 5 analog, is deemed fundamentally unacceptable and could potentially render the peace initiative stillborn before it reaches fruition.
As one senior European diplomat expressed, genuine, sustainable peace remains tenuous as long as Russia perceives itself to hold the military advantage, undermining the urgency to negotiate in good faith. Even with former President Donald Trump expressing optimism that a peace deal is closer than ever, European officials and analysts largely view the year-end timeline as overly ambitious, recognizing that the current diplomatic efforts, while promising compared to previous peace plans, may yet collapse if the fundamental, irresolvable differences between Kiev and Moscow over sovereignty and territory persist.
Consequently, while the Western framework provides an unprecedented level of assured support, establishing a clear deterrent architecture, the ultimate success of this initiative is entirely conditional upon the unpredictable dynamics of Moscow's calculus and whether they perceive the threat of coordinated Western retaliation to outweigh the cost of continued conflict.
The analysis and commentary in this video are based on publicly available sources and represent the channel's independent perspective on the complexities of this unfolding geopolitical situation, which remains highly fluid and subject to the conditional acceptance of parties currently operating under opposing maximalist demands.